Welcome back to the Mandarin Blueprint podcast. I am here with Christine Anderssen, who has kindly agreed to do a follow-up case study with us, where she had previously done a written case study on our website, which I will link to below. But now we're going to talk to you again, Christine, because you're much further into the course. I believe you're at level 39. And this is really interesting for us because we like to see how it's going when you've had a lot more characters under your belt and a lot more chances to see the vocabulary in context. So I have a lot of questions for you about that today. But how about before we get into that, in case people haven't read your written case study, you introduce yourself and maybe mention just how you got into Mandarin Blueprint.
Sure. Okay, so a few months ago, this is all COVID's fault, right? So as so many things these days. So a few months ago when COVID started, I was really looking for something to do that would take my mind off things. And I started to watch Chinese dramas, fantasy dramas and historical dramas and things like that. And, as you do, you talk about these things on Facebook, and then Facebook with their phenomenal listening skills pick up on that, and your advert popped up and I became interested. I started with a pronunciation course and then it just sucked me in. And that's how I started. And I'm really enjoying it.
Cool. So it sounds like you're coming from a place of being very just sort of interested in something related to China, and then that just, it sort of snowballed from there. All right, great. Yes. Well, that's always awesome because that's it's in some ways it's the most pure type of motivation because it's just coming from interest and then the, interest in the language in and of itself. So, so since then you've been doing quite a lot. You've been really participating a lot in the community forum and leaving lots of comments and emailing us questions, which has been great, created some great podcast fodder for us as well. And so one of the things I'm kind of curious about is now that you've reached, I guess the foundation course is about 600 characters and then you're a few more levels in. So I guess you're around, 750 characters or so now?
I had to slow down for the past 3 or 4 weeks because I was sick. So I didn't manage to do as much. So I'm at about 680 or so.
680?
Yeah, 680.
Okay. So how would you rate your improvement in the Hanzo movie method in learning a new character?
It's difficult to say because I wouldn't say it's really, sometimes that movie just gets together, it just works like that, and then other times it's like, oh my goodness, I have to come up with this particular keyword and I've got this prop and I have that prop and I have that character and how on earth am I going to relate these to each other? And then it takes forever. Okay, so it really depends. I think on average, I would say it ranges from sometimes down to like 15 to 20 seconds up to 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So it really just depends on the particular character that you have to build.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to me because I noticed that I got better at it even at like, maybe 2,000 characters or so, because what just would start to happen is I would start to get more creative and realize that there are so many things that you can just instantly do that are kind of, I guess they're what we call special effects or script triggers, but like you just get more naturally creative with it in the sense that you'll go, okay, I have the scene, but can I, add some sound effects or background music or like camera zoom ins that are not just a classic zoom in, but maybe like a creative zoom in that you might see in like an Edgar Wright film or something like that. And, your brain just starts to be able to figure that stuff out. And that can be really fun.
Yeah, I actually think I've got the opposite approach. I really make very minimalistic movies. Okay. My movies are literally like little vignettes, it's just like a little scene. Okay. Sometimes there's no movement, there's no cameras, there's nothing. It's just that I have my sister and she is preparing something for somebody. That's it. That's my whole movie. And that's often more than enough to just able to trigger that character. And I really firmly believe in, you're not making a Hollywood special. Okay.
Hmm.
You're making like a low budget homemade movie.
Yeah,
You just need to do the minimum in order to get that character established.
exactly.
So
And
so
then
that's my outcome.
Anki will tell you if it wasn't good enough. That's what I like about it. Your
Absolutely.
flashcards will let you
Absolutely.
know. And
No,
that's
absolutely, and that happens. So if I put in the minimum effort and I go through my Anki and suddenly this character pops up and it's like, oh my goodness, I've never seen this thing before in my life. Then I
right.
realize, no, my movie is not good enough. Okay, then I go back and I reshoot the movie, and then it's when you sort of come up with a bit of extra. So
Hmm.
you sort of then say, what is it that I've forgotten? Did I forget the actor? Did I forget the scene? Did I forget the prop? Okay, and
Right.
then you spend more attention on getting that right. So you anchor your actor, for example, a bit more clearly. Oh yes, he
Mm.
was there because he was actually trying to do that and that and that, and that is how you remember that it's that particular actor as opposed to
Yeah.
anybody else. So
Perfect.
that's just how you can improve your scenes to make them better. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's great when you realize that the minimum effort that you had put in worked and you do remember it and it's no problem because it's like,
Yeah.
so that's
Mm.
also, that's the flip side of it. So
Yes.
it's really when you have the SRS backing you up, you can relax. And that's what is the best state of mind you want to be in anyway. So yeah, and
Mm.
like for me,
Mm.
a lot of times with adding all that other stuff in is that a lot of times I just wanted to make it a more fun experience
Mm.
sometimes, like, because
Mm. Mm.
it can get a
Mm.
little dry if you're just,
Yes.
doing, maybe like you say, just sort of the bare minimum. And so like,
Mm.
if I
Mm.
was feeling like it was getting a little dry, no problem. I'll just
Mm.
add in some funny things,
Spice it
make
up.
some camera angles happen, whatever. And also I'm a musician, so I love adding the music in and like
Mm.
having the sense of like, all right, I'm in the bedroom, but it's like a jazz club and you got that
Yeah.
in the background and like whatever. It's just those things that kind of make it a
Yes.
sillier kind of thing. But yeah, it's
Yes.
all it's a nice rich tapestry there. So all right,
Mm.
so now that's a little bit of a review of the Hanzo movie method. Now you've been doing several things with sentences, and I want to ask you about your listening materials that you've been putting
Mm.
together. But just
Mm.
as in a more general sense, you remember when you were starting to learn sentences at the beginning of phase 3 and how that might have felt. And now you're in
Mm.
the intermediate course, you've seen, well over 1,000 sentences at this point.
Mm. Mm.
How does it
Mm.
feel looking at sentences now compared to at the beginning of
Mm.
phase 3?
Yes, yes. So that first time that you start to get sentences, it's pretty daunting, and it's like you do it like character by character, and you like totally like it's really slow. It's like being back in grade one,
Mm-hmm.
like you know,
Yeah.
and then I have to say, Phil, the worst is when you start with a longer form content.
Oh yeah. Okay, so
I mean,
phase 4. Yeah.
oh my goodness. When you see that wall of text coming at you, it's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I'm drowning, help.
Yeah.
And now, because in the intermediate, you don't even give the English translations, right? So you
Right.
have to read the sentence and it's like, yeah, I can read this, And I've actually started to read some of the graded Mandarin companion books as well.
Great.
And it's just so awesome to be able to read,
Yeah.
it's so enjoyable to be able to, and the more you get familiar with the characters, the more you don't have to figure out what they are. You just immediately know. So it just
Hmm.
like jumps straight into your brain. It's like you
Yeah.
shortcut the movie. You just
Hmm.
like immediately knows what it is. So yes, it's so noticeable the difference between starting with those first sentences and where I am at the moment. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and I think that's
fantastic.
really important for people at the beginning of phase 3 to hear because
Mm,
it's like the beginning of each new phase
mm,
is definitely it requires, and I mean we're always trying to find ways to make it a little bit less brain
mm,
intensive, but there's some degree of
mm,
not being able to avoid it because you're having to
mm.
go into this, especially with sentences. It's like you've never seen Chinese sentences before, you've just seen Chinese
Mm.
characters, and so
Yeah.
seeing how they relate to each other, it's like it blows my mind sometimes to think that in most schools you also have to you also don't know the characters when you're looking at the sentences. At least with Mandarin Blueprint, the
Mm.
characters for the most part. We're still going to look into how we can improve some of the sentences and have
Yeah.
fewer top-down words. But still,
Mm. Mm.
it's a lot. But then when you go back, I can imagine, maybe in your flashcards, you've seen some phase 3 sentences come up, and you might think like, oh, I remember when I first saw this sentence, it seemed so hard, and you look back at it and go, oh, it's so easy now. And that's one of the things that we always hope people understand, because we're looking at it and we get, oh yeah, you had all these questions about this, and so did I when I was at that point. But you'll look back and you'll go, oh yeah, that really wasn't nearly as hard as it seems.
Yeah.
It's just you needed more of that foundation. Okay. So on the topic of sentences, one of the things that we have native audio in all of our flashcards. However, the focus of the flashcard is to have the sentence on the front with the missing character to give you something to have to think about. So your brain's grammar module has to kind of turn on a little bit and think, is this an adjective or is this an adverb or whatever? But what we didn't have was something where there's listening on the front of the card, and you try to figure out what the sentence is. And what you so kindly did for the folks who are interested on the course, and you post this on the community forum, is you made flashcard decks where the front of the card is the audio, and you're supposed to figure out what the sentence is. And so I'm really curious about how this has been going for you, because we didn't do this originally, but we're looking into maybe for the next set of flashcards that we make, putting them in. So tell me about your experience of these audio on the front flashcards and how they've helped your listening comprehension.
Okay, so personally, I'm actually not using the flashcards for listening, because but I know some people were looking for that. But what I did was that I would extract the sentences from each phase. So I would look up the sentences, and then I would extract them from the Anki media collection, and I would put them in a separate folder, and I would load those on my phone, and I would listen to those. And I would try and figure out what they are. So it's like an Anki deck, but it's not an Anki deck. Okay, I was just doing because more from like a logistical perspective. Yeah, but more from a logistical perspective, it was just easier for me because, for example, I could set up my MP3 player to play that one sentence automatically on repeat, with a few seconds of pause in between. And I could use my headphones to just advance forward to the next sentence. So I would listen, I would lie in bed at night before I go to sleep, and I would listen to these sentences. Now, I would always listen to the sentences one phase behind, so in other words, as soon as I've seen them, and I'm supposed to know them. It's just that when you listen to them without the aid of seeing the characters, it's a totally different story. So I realized that it's so difficult to do, but I think it's really valuable. I think it's so valuable, and I'm so glad I started it at a relatively early stage, because I started it as soon as I finished that first stage with the sentences. I think I even sent you an email where I said, I've just started listening and I'm so depressed because I can't figure anything out.
Same thing. It's like you're at the beginning of it and you're like, this is so hard now, but then you just do it consistently, and then it's suddenly not as hard.
You just have to keep on doing it. So what I would do then is I would listen and I would try and figure out what does the sentence mean. And as sometimes I can figure it out, and sometimes I just don't make any sense. And then I would either at that point just stop and I would look it up in Anki. So I've got a method of just like searching for that audio in my Anki deck, and I would just look it up what it is. Or else I would leave it until the next day because I'm lying in bed and I don't want to bother and so on. And then the next day I would go back. And you know what the surprising thing is that I often find that in the evening when I listen to it, I sometimes can't figure out what it is. The next morning when I go back and I review those same sentences, suddenly the meaning just popped into my head. It's amazing. So I don't know what it is. I've never believed in this learning while you sleep type of thing, but I really wonder whether, just listening to it on repeat before you go to sleep, and then leaving it, and then the next day you listen to it again and suddenly it's a lot clearer. So that often happens as well.
Oh, I definitely, I don't, there's no hard evidence about the playing while you sleep. I mean, I suspect it must have some kind of an effect, but it's also, there's no hard evidence, but there is some evidence that doing things before you sleep while you're still awake but just maybe reading just before bed or whatever, that information tends to be more easily sort of put into the memory banks, because you're kind of sleep is when you kind of collate the memories anyway. So you're doing it right before bed, and then you end up having dreams about whatever you were just reading. But
can I tell you about a dream that I had recently? And this was actually related to Luke. So I actually had an audio on repeat, which was not your audio, but there is other audio like listen to Chinese while you sleep. And as I say, I don't believe in it, but it was like, it's nice sentences and the guy has a nice voice. And I like listening to that if I want to fall asleep. So I got woken up in the early in the morning and I wanted to get some more sleep in. And I started to put this on and I started to dream. And this voice actually started to talk in my dream. And I dreamt I was like sitting across the table from Luke, and this colleague of mine was speaking in Chinese, and it was actually this video that was playing, the audio that was playing. It was actually that playing, but my colleague was saying it, and he was saying, and he said, "Am I saying that right?" And he was like addressing Luke, and Luke was like, "I'm not so sure about that."
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Yeah. So that's a good, at least, that's a little bit of evidence that something's going on there. Cause it took me a lot longer than that to start having dreams in Chinese. I'll have dreams in Chinese now, but like, it took me, way longer than you've been studying. So that's interesting. That's an interesting phenomenon. Sure. Oh, cool. So yeah, I think that we're going to do more with that. One of the things we're going to have our assistant do, we have this excellent assistant named Jofi Cui Dongping. He's in Shenzhen, and he will help us with stuff like this. We'll get him to, change all the file names to the sentences, and then we'll make like packs of the file names from there of the sentences for each level, and we'll make it, so that you can have the levels of the audio and do something like what you're doing. That sounds like a very good idea. So it's on our list. That's awesome. Okay. So you brought up before, you mentioned the longer form content. And so was it the same type of experience where, at first it was daunting, and then now you look back at some of the early phase 4 stuff and go, okay, this is actually not too bad. So tell me about that process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do think that the reason why some of that longer form content in the beginning is so daunting is because there are so many top-down words. If you read it and you come across a word that you don't know, you just immediately, your whole speed is broken and you don't understand, and now you've got to go and look up that word and things like that. So when I go back to that longer form content now, because I've now covered most of those top-down words, it's actually so easy. It's so easy to just read through that. It's really awesome to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's one of our, I have a project I have for each phase, with the exception of phase 1. We don't have any major changes to phase 1 that we're planning on making, but phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and phase 5, we have projects that we're going to, and the intermediate course that we're going to be working on. And the one for phase 4 is because there's kind of too many top-down words in phase 4. We're going to make these preview lessons that sort of explain some of those things ahead of time, so that way it's not so daunting. And then in addition to that, we're also going to analyze them and figure out exactly when they become 98% comprehension, because it's a little bit, in phase 4, writing a 98% comprehension story that isn't just, totally boring is tricky, because it's like that you need to know more. But by the time you get to where you are, which is past that 80% of the language by frequency threshold, it's amazing how much easier it gets. Like when I'm reading through, we're going to be releasing about 60 intermediate stories, hopefully intermediate course stories. Hopefully I'm going to shoot for sometime in January. We're getting very close. We're getting to the final several, and the content in these stories that I'm making very sure are 98% or higher. The content in them it just gets way more complex and interesting, and like far more, like there's this article I was just looking over today all about Kobe Bryant and like how much of an impact he made in China, and like sort of mourning the loss of Kobe Bryant, and talking about his last game against Michael Jordan. And like I learned some stuff from it that I didn't know. I like basketball, but I'm not like a big fan. And then but then right before that, I was reading a story all about Hong Kong and how like Chinese people like view Hong Kong considering the different economic paths. It wasn't a political article, but it was more like they have this different economic system, and isn't that? And so I was just like, wow, this is it's amazing how when you get over that 80% threshold, how much easier it is to have interesting stories. But when you're at the beginning of phase 4, you're not quite there yet. I don't know what it is by frequency at the beginning of phase 4, but it's probably closer to like 50 or 60% by frequency. So it's like, it's much harder to make a story that's interesting and also 98% comprehension. So we're going to work on that. So as you went through that though, what did you think of the phase 5 stories? So the phase 5 are more like little fairy tales, like Little Red Riding Hood and things like that.
Yes. Yeah, no, I enjoyed those. And at that stage, when I was at phase 5, I read them, but I sort of read them once or twice or 3 times maybe, and then I left them. But I'm actually going back now, and I'm practicing my shadowing on Little Red Riding Hood. Yeah, so I'm actually now sort of going back to some of those and rereading them, just to do stuff like, choosing one and then practicing shadowing on that particular one. Because the shadowing is really intensive as well. So one of the biggest challenges for me in learning Chinese is to balance your time. Okay, because there are so many things that you need to do. You need to learn new characters, because if you don't learn new characters, you're not really making progress. On the other hand, you have to see those words in context. So you need to learn the words as well, and you need to see them in context. So you need to do the sentences, but the sentences are so time consuming, so if you spend too much time on the sentences, you don't have time to learn the new things. Then you have to spend time on listening comprehension, and that's also very, very intensive. And then you have to spend time on shadowing. Now and then I still want to keep on watching my movies for general immersion experience. That's my excuse. And I want to find time for that as well. So, I work 8 hours a day, and by the time that I've traveled and I've finished my work, I only have a few hours left. But I have to say, I'm actually spending all of that time on Chinese. Nice. Well, so if you're going to ask me how many hours per day, I would say that learning new characters is actually not that long. It's probably maybe an hour. But I spend a good 2 or 3 or 4 hours in total on learning Chinese per day, just spread across the course of the day. I use my travel time to review my Anki. I then, use my time in the evening to learn new characters. And then just before I go to sleep, I either read a Mandarin companion, or I go back and I read some of the phase 5 fairy stories, or I watch a YouTube video like Bird and Kip, which is like the level that I can actually watch without subtitles at the moment. And, just to get that practice in terms of watching something. And then I still like to watch a totally self-indulgent Chinese drama as well, so I try.
Well, that's what's nice is that you can do, like, this is the Katsumoto thing. He's like, should always be lazy, but just do it in Chinese. It's like sort of sit around and have something on the TV, just make sure that it's in the target language, and it does make everything, turn into something that is much more sort of, you don't ever have to feel bad about it, because it's like, you might think I'm watching too much TV. Well, it's like, well, not if it's in Chinese, then you're getting something out of it. So so considering all of the time you have to, or how you have to fit it into your day amongst your busy schedule, what kind of tips have you come up with that you would want to maybe give to other people in the course for how to manage their time during the day? Because that's the kind of thing that I think everybody wonders about, because you've got a lot going on. You're doing a lot of things in your Chinese. So what would you say? What kind of tips would you give?
Well, I would definitely say that your phone and Anki on your phone is a game changer. Okay, if you're not tied into your PC, you have so much freedom. And I'm just going to beg you guys, don't ever go away from Anki because I think it's fantastic. Okay, I get so much value out of it. Okay, and especially now that even at this late stage that I've learned a few tips and tricks that just made it so much easier. For example, I didn't know that there was like a whiteboard scribble function on Anki Droid. Okay, and that just means, yeah, so that means that I can literally just use my phone to practice my writing, my characters, because I just draw on my phone itself, the characters. Because previously when I wanted to be out and about and traveling on my bus, I had to remember to take my little notebook, because I would like look at the character, write the character, and I would write the character in my notebook. And now I don't actually need a notebook. So I'm like totally independent of that, even regardless of being independent of my PC. And I've also recently discovered that you can put gesture shortcuts into Anki. So I've now put in my double tap is replay audio. So now I can actually do more on the spot listening practice when I do my sentences, as opposed to doing that separately and without even needing a real listening deck. I can just actually use the grammar sentences without looking at the sentence or anything. I can just listen to the audio, and I can double tap and repeatedly listen to the audio, because that to me was one of the things that prevented me from also effectively using the Anki deck, because you want to replay, and if you're on the phone, it's sort of inconvenient to just press the actual replay button. You have to go and look for it to press it, but if you can just double tap, it's just like a replay. So I just have to say that just using the technology effectively. I mean, I can sit on the bus and I can watch my Chinese not my Chinese movies, my Chinese dramas, but I'm talking about all sorts of videos and video content that's about learning Chinese and about learning foreign languages, and my kiddies Chinese movies that I watch without the subtitles to actually force me to sort of really learn. I can watch that on the bus. You also have Pleco on your phone, that just helps you. So it's just all of these productivity tools that you have that you should use to the maximum. And if you're not tied to your PC, you can learn Chinese wherever you go. You can do it while you're waiting in a queue. You can do it at a quick break during lunchtime. You can do it when you walk into the bus stop. You can, you can't do it while you're driving your car. I wouldn't recommend that. But I'm in the fortunate position that I take public transport. So I really see that as an opportunity to actually, fit in as much learning as possible.
I used to do that. I remember I had 50 minutes on the bus in Beijing when I first lived there, and I was doing characters in the back of the bus, just sort of, I had brought my clipboard. I had a clipboard and I was just writing them, every day. So yeah, public transport can be great for that. But if you are driving, you can use the listening immersion. So, that's always a way you can do things, even if you're driving. So I agree. It's kind of like the best way to sort of sum up what you're saying is do the thing that works for the context that you're in. And so if you're not utilizing your phone as best as you can, then you'll be in certain contexts and not be able to study. So you want to make sure that in every possible context, there's something that you could do. If, there are situations where you need to have your full focus and you can't listen to something, but, if there is any possible way for you to fit something in, figure out how you could do that. And then you don't necessarily always do it every time, but the idea is that at least have it be a possibility, cool. Nice. So we've talked about the different phases. Something else that I'm curious about is, if you how would you rate your achievement? So what you've achieved so far in a kind of more general sense, like if you could just sort of comment on how you feel about your achievement so far, from starting from the beginning at pronunciation mastery. And how many months has it been overall?
7.
7 months. All right. Okay, cool.
Yes, 7 months. Yeah. Well, obviously if I look back where I started, which was like 0 zip, as to where I am at the moment. I mean, I can tell my mom that I've just read The Secret Garden, in Chinese. Never mind, it's a graded reader and it's only 300 characters. I mean, it's something that if you had told me 7 months ago that I would have been able to read a whole book in Chinese, you know, at the end of 6 months, because I actually read it 3 or 4 weeks ago, really, you know, I would have been like, no, there's no ways that you can do that. But that being said, look, this is very difficult, okay?
Yeah, sure.
This whole Chinese thing, it's very difficult, okay? It's like, on the one hand, I'm very proud of the progress that I've made, but on the other hand, I realize that there's still such a far way to go, you know. So it's sometimes a bit daunting to think of what still lies ahead, you know, but then I just step back and I say, look, you know, you've come so far, you've achieved so much, just stick with it, you know, don't give up now, because if you give up now, you've wasted all that time and effort that you've put in. So, you know, you just have to realize that it is a long game, you know, and you just have to, and everybody studies at different speeds. So yes, there's some people that race through the course and they achieve a lot, you know, very quickly, but then sometimes life happens or you just, you know, study at a different pace. And it's just that consistency, I think, is the key. You know, you just have to be consistent, and then I believe that I will get there eventually. And there for me is that I can listen to Chinese. I'm not so much worried about being able to talk, because, you know, there's not that much opportunity for me. I live in New Zealand. There's a lot of, I mean, we have a huge Chinese population, but obviously everybody's really English speaking here. So it's not if I need to speak, but I would really love to be able to listen to my movies and being able to understand. And then if I do have to communicate to other Chinese people, that if they want to speak Chinese, I would be able to understand and communicate with them. So that's basically my goal. So that's where I need to get into, which is why I spend so much effort also on listening comprehension, and why I think it's so important as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because the difficulty of it is I suppose it depends on how you frame it, because on the one hand, it is true that like there's many times where you have to kind of look at something new and go, well, I don't get it. So like I have to think about this a fair bit and, you know, go over it in your head and all of that. But on the other hand, like it's mostly just a matter of steps. And like while you're taking those steps, learning a character, looking at a sentence and whatever, there are a lot of them. There's a lot of steps for sure. And 7 months of doing a few hours a day is still there. You realize there's still a lot more steps. And in fact, there's no way around it. No matter what skill you're learning, the better you get at it, the more you understand how much you don't know, right? Like, it's just, unfortunately, it's just how it is. But luckily though, how much you don't know is like when you get to the point where you know enough, you can explain to a Chinese person or explain in writing or explain in speech what it is that you don't know, and then go figure out how to find it out in the language. And that's a big moment. I think that's really the moment that you want to get to, because it's a skill that follows you around your whole life. So like at some point, you know, you get to a point where it's like, well, okay, as long as I know how to figure it out, you know, I run into words I don't know all the time. It's like just natural in life. Like, you know, for example, I don't know anything about vocabulary of women's makeup. I don't know anything about it. And I just like realized the other day, because I moved in with my girlfriend, and like there were things I realized, like, oh, if I were to go to the store and pick something up for her, I mean, I know like kohong is lipstick, because it's such an obvious word, mouth red. But like, you know, I was like, oh geez, I don't know anything about this, but I certainly know how to figure it out. You know, like if I needed to, it wouldn't be too hard. I could go into the store and be like, hi, I don't know anything about this. What's that stuff that you put on your face to whatever? What's the, you know, it's like, that you put around your eyes, and I'm sure that it's also, I'm sure that they're very easy words if I wanted to figure it out, because Chinese is such a logical language. So the point is just being that the daily steps and the consistency is all that really matters. And in a way, it's almost like an easy thing within the difficult, in the sense that all you have to do is just keep making progress every day. And at some point, there isn't a day that it happens. There's not like a finish line that you cross, but at some point you kind of realize, oh, I know how to figure things out. And once you know how to figure things out, then you know that, well, you've essentially done it. because
Yeah.
you'll be
Yeah.
able to find out any new information that is going to come at you. So, maybe you're not quite there yet at 7 months, but geez, you're making great progress. Like where you are now compared to where I was at 7 months, it's not even close. It's like you're way ahead of where I was at. And I managed to pass the HSK 6 after 2 years. So like I have high hopes for the next, year of your studies. That's for sure.
Maybe I should just explain what I meant with difficult. While you were talking, I was actually thinking that the only aspect to me that's really, really difficult is the listening. Okay, for me, learning new characters is like so easy peasy, and it's probably ironic because that's probably one of the most difficult things for people who don't know the Mandarin blueprint method. They would think that characters would be one of the most difficult things because how do you remember the characters? But because you guys make it so easy, literally, it's the easiest thing in the world to learn a new character. I mean, it's just so easy. And the as you guys have pointed out numerous times, the grammar system is also not that difficult. I mean, it's relatively straightforward. So it's not, as soon as you can start reading sentences and you start to get used to the rhythm and you start to see those repeating grammar points who are sort of coming up, you start to recognize them and you start to be able to figure out. Some of the more difficult philosophical sentences are a bit difficult, but
sure.
Like if you don't like what is bad about yourself, just change it. In Chinese, it's like, oh my goodness, okay.
Chinese is a very philosophical language. There's like a lot of sentences where you're like, I think you just blew my mind with that one sentence.
But the listening, that's the most difficult bit, and when I say difficult, that's normally what I refer to. The fact that the sounds
objectively the most difficult bit. It's the last one to come is listening, and that I'm even including speaking and writing in that. I think that listening is always the hardest because you're not it's not deriving from you, and it's not something that you have time to think about like you do with reading. With reading you can take your time with it, and with speaking and writing you at least know what you're trying to say. But with somebody like I still, especially on the phone, gosh, somebody calls me on the phone. If I don't know who they are or why they're calling me, I'll still have time. And also speaking Sichuanese, I'll just be like, what? Who are you? And then once I am able to grab some context and I'm like, oh, you're the guy calling me from IKEA telling me you're going to deliver my sofa tomorrow. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Now I have the context and I can wrap my head around what you're saying. Also, would you mind speaking Mandarin, please? And they always just say, oh, okay. No problem. No problem. Right. Okay, cool. So that was something I was curious about. That's great. And I think just by the by, I mean, like at level 30, 39, 7 months in, all the things you're doing, I mean, I, for one, am hugely impressed. I think that what you've done so far is very, it's great progress, especially considering you have a full-time job. So like, just very well done. So yeah, I guess a question I'm always curious about, because Luke and I are very concerned with this all the time, is do you feel like that we're answering your questions adequately, that you feel like we're there for you on the course?
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we started the school and you said, sort of seeing you for the first time in person, it's like, really? It feels like I've known you forever,
Yeah, right.
So that's probably from my side, because I mean, I look at the podcasts and the interviews and things like that. But I mean, the way that you guys interact with us is just absolutely fantastic. It's like you feel that you're not alone in this. You feel that I feel that you've got our backs. You're there and you answer and you come back and you support us and you answer things so quickly. It's amazing. I don't know of any other course really where you have that personal interaction and that personal connection with the people. That's it's not as if you created the material and now it's out there and you go off on your own and try and figure it out. It's that constant interaction and that communication that we have with you guys that really help us to do this, and help us to get through this. Now it's absolutely great. Yeah, I can't.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. I mean, like, it's one of the best. It's why I'm very grateful for Luke, and that why I think Luke and I have sort of figured out a lot of the positives of a good business partnership, because there's negatives in the sense that it's like, well, what if you have conflict or you disagree about something? Luckily, we don't tend to have too much conflict, which is great. But the advantage is that, for example, half the week he's responding to people and half the week I am. So like I get a chance to it never overwhelms me totally, because it's like, I can, sure, I'll really engage with it from Sunday to Wednesday afternoon, but then I can kind of focus on my main projects with the course on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It's like that it's very good in that way. And there's so many instances in which Luke has made sure, okay, here's a bit of feedback that I think means we need to change something. And then, I'll look at that and I'll run it around my brain. And then we just sort of, it bounces back and forth. And that reminds it's sort of this Eastern idea of, if you take away the ego from the situation and you just go, well, right now there's two brains communicating, then what you can do is build off that. And then we add in the rest of the community and all of those ideas and like all of the contributions. I mean, I think we've had over 10,000 comments just of people suggesting props. And it's like, that stuff is great, excellent. You can't build that. You can't do that stuff without all these people. And so it's like, that has created this situation where it's self-reinforcing and we feel very excited about it. I know that someday, we'll have to just say, okay, we've put as much into it as we can, and we're going to move on to something else in our lives, and maybe somebody else will take over that element of it. But my kind of hope is that every question that comes up, we've already given it an answer, and we just train somebody in how to find the answer. But for now though, I love it. I really don't mind it at all, and it's a lot of fun. So I guess another question I have that's just sort of a bit open-ended, and it's fine if you don't have any further comments on it, but just, do you have any further comments about, how the phases progressed and, how you feel like because, the foundation course is about introducing all the basic concepts from characters into vocab, into sentences, into, shorter graded readers, into longer graded readers. And then the intermediate course is just about consolidating all of that and, building up more characters and stuff. So that progression, do you have any other general comments about it, or, how we might be able to improve it?
So the one thing that you're already going to do, which is having that preparation lesson for the longer form content, because I really feel that it almost sometimes, I think it does feel overwhelming when you first come across the longer form content without having a translation and with having those many top-down words. So I think just doing that would really help. The one thing, and you might have picked this up, that I have a gripe with, is that sometimes the translations in the foundation course have some words missing. Sometimes.
Translation. Translation. If anybody out there thinks that translation is the same as knowing a language, it's not at all. Like, especially with Chinese. First of all, we hired a guy to do it for us, mostly because just to save time. And he did a pretty good job. But it's like anybody, they have their own way of interpreting something, and there's so much of it. It's like, what is the real way to understand this? And then you have to ask yourself, do we directly translate it, which would be kind of what everybody calls Chinglish, which is like, it's not how you would say something in English, but it's more like a direct translation. Or do you do the real translation? Like, this is, and then our instinct is, we'll do the real translation because that'll give you a sense of what it really means. But then that jump from direct translation to real translation leaves so much room for interpretation. So for sure, like, we're always open to somebody saying, like, I'm not sure about this translation, and that's fine, because we'll look at it again. But to anybody who's on the course, there's a lot of interpretation that has to happen with translation, and sometimes it's not perfect. I'm sure that there are
no, definitely. It's just that when you're in the foundation course and you see the translation and it somehow doesn't make quite a lot of sense, it's like, or sometimes how can I put this? you're starting to doubt yourself because you start to doubt whether you're actually understanding the sentence correctly. So, so the more sort of accurate the translation can be, however you want to interpret that, you know, that would be better for the foundation course. At this stage, we don't have the translations on the intermediate, so that's not such a big problem. Yeah, so
and
that
they
was
get
the one
even
thing.
harder to do. Like that's one of the reasons why I've been kind of dreading that idea of doing translations for the intermediate course, because again, the more complex it gets, the more room there is for interpretation. And I'm also kind of, it's one of those things people have asked for, but I'm still kind of against it, because I'm like, you can get to the point. I mean, I do get that it would make people feel better about their understanding to some degree, but on the other hand, I'm like, take away this crutch. It's English is a crutch. You know, you don't want to. So I'm of two minds about it, but one thing we're gonna do in the intermediate course.
I get what you're saying. No, and then you also mentioned that you're going to publish longer form content. So for the intermediate course, so I have to say that every time that I hit one of those longer form contents in the foundation course, I was like, oh, where am I going to get the time to get through this? But now that I'm in the intermediate and there's not as much of the longer form content, I'm sort of missing it, you know. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's why in the intermediate course, we're never going to give you anything that isn't already at 98% comprehension. So that way the top down words aren't so much. So you can just, and you could even, usually in the average article, there might be like 8 top down words and it's several paragraphs. So it's like not so much. You could even just look over them ahead of time and then just go, okay, here's what they are. And we also we put the names and things like that in green, because that's not the type of thing that you have to memorize. It's no big deal. It's like, oh, this is just how you say, you know, Kobe. Or Michael Jordan or whatever. It's not important that you remember this word. And
it's not a word. It's not suddenly a new word that has suddenly popped up, because especially in the graded readers as well, you know, the names are made up of characters that you already know and you would use in a different context, you know, like Ma, you know, or C or something like that, you know, and then they put them together and then suddenly you realize, okay, this is not some new strange word that you suddenly have to figure out. It's actually a name.
I remember thinking that with, you know, when I was in university, the big advantage I had over the other university students was that I learned characters individually. And I finished, you know, learning about 3,000 characters by like before the end of the, before I even entered the intermediate classes there. And so what that meant was that when I was reading like Harry Potter or something, and I would see everybody always had the same comment. They're like, oh, I start reading it and then I see the, this, you know, word and I'm like, what in the world is this? And then I realized, oh, it's like Dumbledore, or it's, you know, this, but I remember thinking, you know, you wouldn't have this problem if you knew the characters, because like as you get, especially when we make the advanced course, there's going to be a lot more of those characters that are really only used for transliterations, like the kind of words that are just like, you just use this, like Qiao Dan, that Dan in Jordan, you know, Qiao Dan is pretty much only ever used in like Daniel or Jordan or whatever. And so you see it and you go, what is it? It's like, well, if you knew the character, you'd know that this is one of those. And so it's probably a name. In fact, it helps you like recognize that this is a name as opposed to something else. But anyway, so that's some good feedback. Another thing that we're going to do, which I'm very excited about, is the preview lessons in the intermediate course are going to be taught by a Chinese teacher who we love, Yo Lao Shi, and he's agreed to set up the preview lessons for those, and you guys are going to love that. I mean, it's going to take a while to shoot those, so I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be ready next Tuesday, but he's the best teacher I've ever had in maybe any subject. So like he's just got this way of speaking that's very understandable, and he understands how to communicate to foreign learners in such a way. And it's like also by the intermediate course, it's time for us to stop, you know, talking so much in English. So it's like, it's ready for, you're ready for the Chinese teacher. So that's exciting.
Really exciting. Yes.
Yeah.
Looking
So
forward
we'll see
to
how
that
goes.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, Christine, this has been great to catch up with how you're doing on the course. Was there anything else that you wanted to address before we sign off for the day?
No, it's all good. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all your contributions. You're making great progress. And, I particularly like that you engage a lot in the community forum, and clearly people like that because you get a lot of engagement there. So thanks so much. And please get in touch with us again when you finish up the intermediate course, because we would love to hear how that's going from there. And I'm sure that you'll have many more tips and suggestions. I'm sure this is going to be very useful for people. So thank you so much.
Okay. All good. Thanks.
Bye-bye.